Once Upon a Time is a great time in more ways than one. It's a time travel story, it's a comedy that actually works on this show, and it stars Buster Keaton. Legendary wouldn't be a substantial enough word to cover the importance of Keaton's contributions to film in the silent era and beyond. A true star in his day, the appearance of this living icon on television in the early 1960s gave viewers of the time period a dose of nostalgia that had to have gone over well. The fact that he was in a Twilight Zone episode filled with classic gags and an intentional tribute to his era made for an absolutely delightful watch. Woodrow Mulligan is a grumpy, bumbling janitor working for a scientist in the year 1890. After an eventful morning, he gets to work where his boss, Professor Gilbert, has left out a newly minted successful creation, the time helmet. After setting it to what year you'd like to go, it brings you there for 30 minutes only. Tired of his own time period, Mulligan puts on the helmet and accidentally sets it to the early 1960s. It turns on, which startles the janitor, and he runs through the streets, making trouble for the local police officer until it fully ignites and sends Woodrow some 70 years into the future. After losing the helmet, he recovers it and sees that it's damaged. Luckily, he runs into an electronic scientist named Rollo, who he explains his situation to. Rollo believes his story, and together they go to a repair shop to get the helmet fixed before the 30 minutes are up and Mulligan is stranded in the 1960s. In Richard Matheson's first script of the season, he thought it'd be a great idea to somehow get Buster Keaton into the show. He had met him previously, so Matheson began to work on the story that turned into Once Upon a Time. The writer crafted the play as a slapstick comedy similar to what Keaton was known for in his heyday. I thought all those physical bits worked great, but there were apparently some behind-the-scenes issues in post-production. The end result didn't sit well with Matheson, who had a big chunk of his story changed. He had written the piece as a non-stop chase that never let up, and he felt like the final product got bogged down by the stuff in the repair shop. In truth, there were several changes made in the editing phase. Buck Houghton said years later that the episode just wasn't working as originally intended. They needed to adjust a few things and had a day or two of reshoots with Keaton back on set. Replacing chases through a few other locations in the 1960s were all the repair shop sequences. They even brought in a new uncredited director, Les Goodwins, to handle those shots. Whether this was a positive or negative change from a viewer's perspective, I can't be sure. But one change they made that I absolutely loved was re-editing all the 1890 scenes in the silent movie style. Obviously a tribute to Keaton as most people knew him, this made for an unexpected, fascinating, and humorous set of sequences. It was apparently a production crew member's idea to spice up the episode. I can confidently say it worked. The editor cut 2 out of every 3 frames to give the footage that signature hand crank look. They even scraped the film on the editing room floor to give the scenes authentic scratches. That's dedication. The addition of intertitles to replace the audible dialogue and silent film era piano music by William Lava and Ray Turner completed the transformation, and I think the piece is better for it. Credited director Norman Z. MacLeod was a mainstay in 1930s comedies. In the early 60s, he was semi-retired and only worked on something when an interesting opportunity presented itself. Well, working with the one and only Buster Keaton must have sounded exciting because it got MacLeod on board. Having a bona fide comedy director from around Keaton's primetime period was just another detail showing how far the production team was willing to go to give this episode an appropriate feel. The time travel element in Once Upon a Time was pretty fun. The different sets used successfully recreated 2 separate eras, and the gags in 1890 and 1960 both worked for similar and disparate reasons. The bits in the past with that ridiculous-looking helmet and Keaton running around without his pants on were classic buffoonery. In the present, the comedy is more fish out of water, but just as entertaining. There's a really dynamic chase that ensues when a kid steals Mulligan's helmet. The camera movement, amount of extras, and Keaton's signature stylings made this unlike most things we had seen on the Twilight Zone. When Mulligan eventually runs into Rollo after this, I got some Doc Brown vibes.
By George, I believe you, sir! I believe you, you are from 1890!
I finally invent something that works!
Keaton's physical comedy is of course the standout among the performances. Everyone else is alright. Stanley Adams as Rollo has some funny bits as the erratic scientist, and his chemistry with Keaton works just enough on screen. Jesse White as the aloof repairman is a staple archetype of these kinds of comedies, even if the sequence in his shop has a few too many repeated gags. It's no secret who the people came to see here, though, and on that level, this installment delivered. Eventually, the repairman is able to fix the time helmet, but eager to live a simpler life in 1890, Rollo steals the device and runs off. Just before ignition, Mulligan is able to jump on the scientist, and together, they travel back in time. At first charmed, Rollo grows to hate his new surroundings. The time period just doesn't suit his more modern style of living. So back in Professor Gilbert's lab, Woodrow sets the time helmet to the 1960s, places it on his friend's head, and Rollo disappears in a flash, back to the future. The music really adds to the tone of the silent stuff, and in one of my favorite parts, they bring in the Twilight Zone theme under Rod's ending narration.
That there is much wisdom in a third old phrase which goes as follows: stay in your own backyard.
Love that. In summation, the pacing, shooting style, silent sequences, and Buster Keaton himself make Once Upon a Time more than worth watching. It's a comedy written by Richard Matheson that may have had its issues throughout production, but nevertheless accomplishes what it set out to do. From my perspective, it's a funny comedy with plenty of bits that easily had me laughing. This is indeed a one-of-a-kind episode that I'm categorizing as necessary viewing. Check it out. And you know what? While you're at it, give The General a watch to see one of Keaton's most impressive works. Just go ahead and relax, put on one of those helmets, set it to the 5th dimension, and spend some time in the Twilight Zone.